You open your eyes and find yourself standing on a dusty Roman road, one that stretches so far into the horizon it seems endless. The surface beneath your sandals is made of carefully placed stone, laid by the engineering might of Rome itself. At first glance, you might think the road was built for speed and travel, but in truth, its purpose was survival, the survival of armies that needed to move swiftly, not just to fight, but to eat, to drink, and to endure. Today, you are among the Roman legionaries, one of thousands of men moving slowly across this road, each carrying an extraordinary burden. When you think of soldiers, you might imagine weapons gleaming in the sun, shields raised high, or armor clanking in battle. But in reality, the most exhausting aspect of being a Roman soldier was not the fight itself, it was the daily march, the endless road, and above all, the sheer weight of everything you had to carry. Historians estimate that a Roman legionary carried between 60 to 100 pounds of equipment on every march. Imagine that for a moment. Picture yourself waking up, strapping a heavy pack to your back, and walking not for 1 or 2 hours, but for 20 miles under the punishing sun, only to stop at night, set up camp, and then do it all again the next day. The burden was so heavy that soldiers were nicknamed Marius mules, after the Roman general Gaius Marius, who reformed the army in the late 2nd century BCE. Marius decided that soldiers should carry their own supplies instead of relying on slow-moving baggage trains. This made his armies faster and more self-sufficient, but it also made the life of the common soldier grueling. So, what did this pack actually include? If you were to open it and examine its contents, you wouldn't find treasures or comforts. Instead, you would find the basic tools of survival. A wooden pole for tent construction, rolled up with leather straps. A cooking pot, blackened by smoke, so the soldier could prepare a simple meal. At the end of the day, a water flask, never quite enough to quench thirst on the long road. And always food, usually hard wheat rations, sometimes dried meat or cheese, but mostly grain, the foundation of the Roman diet. Soldiers carried tools for digging trenches, stakes for building camp fortifications, and even small grinding stones to prepare their grain. Imagine the clatter as hundreds of these packs moved together, iron pots striking against tools, the groan of leather straps pulled tight, the uneven rhythm of boots against stone. This sound was the daily reality of a Roman legionary, as constant as the sun rising and setting. The march itself was as much about discipline as it was about travel. Commanders enforced order down to the smallest details. You didn't just walk in any formation you pleased, you walked in step, your line neat and exact. To fall out of formation, to lag behind, or to abandon your pack was not simply frowned upon, it could be punished harshly. The Roman army was built on the principle that endurance was as valuable as courage. After all, the battles themselves were rare compared to the endless days of walking. And when the march ended, the work was far from done. Every single night, soldiers were required to build a camp from scratch. This was not a simple matter of lying down beneath the stars. No, the Romans were systematic. Trenches had to be dug, ramparts raised, tents erected in precise rows, and watch posts established. Every camp was a miniature fortress, designed to protect the army from surprise attack. Building it required hours of back-breaking labor, all after walking most of the day with those crushing packs. Only when the work was finished could the soldier sit, eat, and rest. The food was simple and repetitive. Grain, boiled into a thin porridge or baked into coarse bread, formed the majority of the diet. Sometimes vinegar mixed with water, known as pasca, served as a drink, both refreshing and disinfectant. Wine was rare, meat rarer still. The monotony of such a diet would wear on anyone, but it was practical, and practicality mattered more than taste. Water was one of the most important considerations. Marches often crossed dry terrain, and the army depended on careful planning to ensure access to rivers, streams, or wells. You might imagine the relief of a soldier after a long march in the heat, arriving at a water source, dipping his flask, and taking that first long drink. Yet water was also dangerous. Poorly chosen supplies could spread disease through the entire army, weakening men before a battle ever began. Disease was, in fact, a greater enemy than swords. The cramped quarters of camp, the exhaustion of daily labor, and the lack of sanitation meant that illness spread easily. Lice, fleas, and stomach sickness were everyday companions. For the common soldier, surviving the march and surviving the camp was just as important as surviving the battlefield. The armor and weapons themselves added to the burden. A Roman legionary carried a scutum, the large rectangular shield, which alone could weigh around 20 pounds. Add to this the gladius, a short stabbing sword, the pilum, a heavy throwing spear, and a helmet of iron or bronze. By the time you counted every strap, buckle, and tool, the soldier was nearly swallowed by his own equipment. It is little wonder that the men of the legion looked more like moving pack animals than warriors during the march. And yet, they endured. The discipline of the Roman army, its ability to move across vast distances with such efficiency, is what allowed Rome to expand and hold such a massive empire. Without this endurance, battles would never have been fought, victories never won. The glory of generals and emperors depended on the anonymous labor of thousands of men who shouldered the weight of empire on their backs, 1 mile at a time. As you picture this, imagine the scene at the end of the day. The sun sets low, throwing long shadows across the camp. The fires burn, smoke curling upward into the darkening sky. Soldiers sit in groups, some eating, others sharpening blades or repairing gear. The sounds of Latin words drift across the air, some joking, some complaining, some simply quiet from exhaustion. And always, beyond the ramparts, lies the dark wilderness, full of unknown dangers. The soldier knows that tomorrow the march continues, the pack goes back on, and the road stretches endlessly ahead. It is easy to romanticize the Roman soldier as a heroic figure of battle, but the truth is that most of his life was spent here, on the road, under the crushing weight of supplies, surrounded by dust and discipline. The battlefield was only a brief interruption to the longer, harder struggle of simply enduring day by day. So, as you rest tonight, think of the endless march, the heavy pack, the monotonous meals, the routine of camp building. Think of the soldier who carried Rome on his back not through glory, but through sheer endurance. And yet, a question remains: was this endurance sustainable forever, or did the very weight that gave Rome strength also wear it down over time? When you picture the Roman army, you might imagine sharp formations, shields locked together in the famous testudo, or tortoise formation, and commanders shouting orders across the field. But the truth is, such moments were rare interruptions in a soldier's life. The real daily struggle was not simply about walking and carrying, but about living under a system of discipline so strict, so unyielding, that it shaped the very character of the army itself. As you sit in the Roman camp tonight, the fires low, the earthworks raised, you begin to notice that every action, from when the soldiers sleep to how they eat, is guided by an iron framework of rules. Rome did not win battles by chance. It won them by imposing order on chaos, and nowhere was that more visible than in how it treated its soldiers. Each Roman soldier belonged to a contubernium, a squad of 8 men who shared a tent, a pack mule, and daily responsibilities. You did not choose these tent mates, they were assigned, and together you formed the smallest unit of the army. If one man faltered, the others bore the burden. If one man disobeyed, the punishment could fall upon the group. This was intentional. Rome understood that collective responsibility bred unity. A soldier might fail for himself, but he would think twice if his failure dragged down his companions. Even the layout of the camp reflected this obsession with order. Each tent was positioned in precise rows, the headquarters in the center, with the commander's tent at its heart. Roads were cut through the camp so that troops could assemble at a moment's notice. To a casual observer, every Roman camp, no matter where it stood, looked nearly identical. That familiarity was itself a form of comfort, a small sense of stability in the endless uncertainty of campaign life, but what truly set the Roman army apart was its use of punishment. Where other armies relied on charisma or loyalty, Rome relied on fear and law. You may be surprised at how severe these punishments could be, even for small offenses. Falling asleep on guard duty was one of the gravest crimes a soldier could commit. The penalty was death, often carried out by stoning or clubbing, sometimes by your own comrades. This was not cruelty for cruelty's sake. The army believed that one man's lapse could doom thousands. If a sentry failed, an entire camp could be slaughtered in its sleep. Desertion, cowardice, theft, all carried harsh consequences. But perhaps the most infamous punishment was decimation. If a unit was guilty of mutiny or cowardice, it could be lined up and divided into groups of 10. Then, lots were drawn, and one man in each group was executed by his 9 comrades. The survivors were often forced to camp outside the fortifications and subsist on meager rations as an added humiliation. Decimation was rare, but the mere threat of it hung over every soldier's head, a reminder that Rome valued discipline above all else. It wasn't all punishment, however. Roman commanders also knew the value of reward. A soldier who showed bravery in battle might be awarded a corona moralis, a wall crown, for being the first to scale enemy defenses, or a phallera, a kind of military medal, for acts of courage. Entire units could be granted double rations, better quarters, or even citizenship rights for exemplary service. Still, the day-to-day motivation was less about glory and more about survival. You worked because you had to. You endured because everyone around you endured. And for most legionaries, the dream was not a medal but simply reaching the end of your service and returning home with a modest pension and a piece of land. As the days turned into weeks, the rhythm of life became mechanical. Wake up at dawn. Dismantle the camp. Shoulder the pack. March until the afternoon sun made every breath heavy. Stop, build the new camp, eat a ration of porridge, and collapse into sleep, only to do it again the next day. Blisters formed on feet. Shoulders ached from straps cutting into the skin. Muscles cramped beneath armor. You can almost hear the mutters of men as they rubbed sore legs, or the quiet curses whispered as yet another trench was dug in the stony earth. And always there was the constant watchfulness. Even when not on the battlefield, soldiers lived with the knowledge that ambush could come at any time. A forest could hide enemies. A village could betray them. The silence of a valley could be broken by arrows in a heartbeat. The camp's ramparts were as much psychological barriers as physical ones. That if the march and the labor didn't wear you down, disease did. Insects, bad water, spoiled grain, these could kill more men than enemy blades. Legionaries learned small tricks for survival. Vinegar diluted in water helped reduce sickness. Burning fires at night kept insects away. Sharing a tent with 7 others may have been cramped, but it offered warmth in cold climates. There was also the enemy of boredom. Life on campaign often meant long periods of waiting, punctuated by sudden bursts of terror. Soldiers carved dice out of bone, played gambling games with pebbles, or told stories of past campaigns. Some learned to write simple notes home, though literacy was not universal. Others sang songs, often mocking their officers or lamenting the endless march. These were the small threads of humanity woven into an otherwise harsh existence. When you step back and look at this life, it becomes clear why the Roman soldier is remembered as both formidable and weary. He was not merely a fighter, but a builder, a laborer, and a survivor. His strength was not measured only by the thrust of his sword but by his ability to endure monotony, pain, and strict discipline. To serve in the Roman army was to give up much of one's individuality. You marched in step, obeyed without question, and submitted to the collective rhythm of the legion. Yet this was the very strength of Rome. An army of individuals might scatter, but an army drilled into a single organism could conquer continents. As the night deepens in camp, you might imagine lying beneath the canvas of your tent, the air heavy with the smell of sweat, smoke, and earth. Around you, men shift in restless sleep. Somewhere in the distance, a sentry coughs, shifting his spear as he keeps his lonely vigil. The day has been long, but tomorrow will be just as long, and the rules, the weight, and the discipline will never loosen. And here a thought lingers: could such unyielding discipline, though it brought victory, also strip away too much of a soldier's humanity, leaving only obedience where once there was will? The sun rises, casting its light across the ordered rows of tents, and today feels different. For weeks, perhaps months, the march has continued without confrontation. But now, at the edge of an enemy's territory, the long cycle of carrying, digging, and waiting has reached the moment every soldier both dreads and anticipates: battle. Yet here is the truth that few imagine. For the Roman soldier, the battle itself was only one more burden, another duty to endure. Most of his life was spent preparing for it, not fighting it. When battle finally came, it was rarely glorious. It was exhausting, confusing, terrifying, and often as deadly to the mind as to the body. Before the legion even faced its enemy, hours of preparation took place. Weapons were checked, shields repaired, armor polished and adjusted. Horses were fed, commanders consulted their officers, scouts returned with reports of the terrain ahead. The legionary, standing in his cantaburnium, might run his hand along the edge of his gladius, checking for nicks. He might adjust the leather straps that bound his armor, tightening them against his shoulders. He might eat a hurried meal of bread and dried fruit, knowing it could be his last. The officers shouted orders, forming men into their ranks. Centurions, scarred veterans with vine staffs in hand, strode along the lines, correcting posture, barking instructions, striking shoulders or helmets to jolt men into alertness. The air itself felt charged, heavy with anticipation. Unlike many armies of the ancient world, Rome thrived on organization. Formations were carefully planned, centuries of 80 men grouped into cohorts, cohorts into legions. Everyone knew their place, for discipline in the moment before battle was as vital as courage in the fight itself. When the signal came, often the blare of horns, the beat of drums, or the raising of a standard, the lines advanced. The ground trembled beneath thousands of sandals striking in unison. Shields locked together, forming a wall of wood and iron, as pila, heavy javelins, were hurled in a deadly rain toward the enemy. Imagine the weight of that moment. Dust rises. Shouts fill the air. The sharp whistle of arrows cuts across the sky. You grip your shield tighter, the wood already splintering from the impact of projectiles. Ahead, the enemy closes the distance. And then, suddenly, the line collides. The first moments are chaos. Spears thrust, swords slash, men scream in pain or rage. The Roman gladius, designed for stabbing rather than slashing, is pushed forward in short, brutal motions, often striking beneath or around an enemy's shield. The scutum protects your left side, while your right hand thrusts again and again. Around you, the centurion's voice tries to cut through the noise, urging the line forward. What is striking about ancient combat is not just the danger but the exhaustion. Within minutes, your arms ache, your breath comes ragged, your shield grows heavy. Sweat pours beneath your helmet, stinging your eyes. The sound is overwhelming, the clash of iron, the cries of the wounded, the drum of weapons striking shields. The ground becomes slippery, not just with dirt and dust, but with blood. And yet, discipline holds. Rome's strength was not in individual heroics, but in the ability of men to fight as one. When one man fell, another stepped forward. When the line faltered, officers and centurions beat men back into formation. Victory was not a matter of brilliance, but of outlasting the enemy, grinding them down through organization, cohesion, and sheer persistence. When the shouting fades and the enemy scatters, the soldier's work is still not done. Pursuit, mopping up survivors, looting supplies, all were part of the aftermath. Then came the grim reality, tending to the wounded and burying the dead. The battlefield, when seen in the quiet after combat, was not a place of glory but of horror. Bodies lay in heaps, shields splintered, spears broken, the earth soaked dark. The smell of iron and blood clung to everything. Comrades who had shared your tent, laughed beside you, carried their packs alongside yours, some now lay motionless in the dust. The Roman army was efficient even in death. Burial details were organized, mass graves dug. Equipment was salvaged, weapons gathered, and supplies inventoried. Nothing was wasted, not even the armor stripped from fallen foes. Yet for the soldier, the sight of loss left a mark that no discipline could erase. That night, around the campfires, the mood was different. There might be celebration for victory, but beneath it lay silence, men staring into the flames, their minds replaying the day's terror. Some would boast loudly, masking fear with laughter. Others would sit alone, quietly eating their ration of bread, thinking of the dead. For most soldiers, one battle was not the end but only another step in years of service. A Roman legionary served for 20 to 25 years. 25 years of marches, camps, discipline, disease, and the occasional clash of armies. Imagine yourself entering the army in your late teens and leaving only when your hair had begun to gray. Those who survived to the end were often rewarded with land, sometimes in newly conquered provinces, sometimes in their homeland. Citizenship could be granted to those who did not already possess it. But many never lived to see that reward. The average soldier's life expectancy on campaign was brutally short, and even those who survived bore scars, physical and mental, for the rest of their lives. When you think of Rome's empire stretching from Britain to the Middle East, it is easy to imagine that it was built on the orders of emperors, the strategies of generals, or the grand sweep of politics. But beneath all of that lay the unending endurance of the common soldier. It was not a single battle that built Rome, but the endless marches. Not one general's genius, but the discipline instilled in thousands of nameless men. The empire was carved not just by victories but by the sweat, pain, and survival of those who carried packs, dug ditches, built roads, and endured hardship after hardship. And as you lie in your tent, shield resting beside you, pack ready for another march, you might ask yourself, did the glory of empire truly belong to the commanders whose names we remember, or to the countless ordinary soldiers whose lives were consumed in the grind of survival? You open your eyes not on a battlefield, but in the rocky hills of ancient Sparta. The sun beats down on a land that seems both harsh and simple, olive groves, rugged mountains, and a town that lacks the wealth and splendor of Athens. Here, life is not about luxury, art, or philosophy. Here, life is about discipline, endurance, and war. From the moment you are born in Sparta, your life is not your own. A council of elders examines every infant, searching for signs of weakness or deformity. A baby judged unfit for the rigors of Spartan life is left to die on the slopes of Mount Taygetus. It is a brutal custom, shocking to the modern mind, but it reveals the Spartan truth: survival of the state outweighs survival of the individual. If you survive, your path is already set. At the age of 7, you are taken from your family and placed into the agoge, the Spartan system of education and training. This is no gentle schooling. You will not spend your days memorizing poetry or learning to debate, as Athenian boys do. Instead, your world becomes one of hunger, pain, obedience, and unrelenting discipline. Imagine yourself as a boy in this system. Your bed is not a mattress, but reeds you are expected to gather yourself from the riverbank. You wear a single cloak year-round, regardless of the weather, a thin wool garment that leaves you shivering in winter and sweating in summer. Shoes are forbidden, you walk barefoot over rocky soil, your feet hardening into calloused leather. Food is scarce by design. You are deliberately underfed, taught to endure hunger as a constant companion. If you want more, you must steal it. But if you are caught, the punishment is severe, not for the theft itself, but for failing to be cunning enough to succeed. The lesson is simple: survival requires both endurance and skill. Training is relentless. Days are filled with running, wrestling, mock battles, and endless drills. You are taught to fight with fists, with sticks, with weapons, and even with teeth if needed. Every game is competitive, every moment an opportunity to harden your body and sharpen your will. Bruises, cuts, and broken bones are accepted as part of learning. Complaining is forbidden. Tears are a mark of shame. The agoge is not just about the body. It also trains the mind in obedience. You are taught to answer questions briefly, with sharp wit, the origin of the word laconic, meaning terse and to the point. You are encouraged to endure humiliation, to remain silent under insult, to suppress fear even when every instinct screams otherwise. Within your unit of boys, bonds form that will last a lifetime. You eat together, sleep together, train together. You fight side by side and are punished side by side. Individual desires are crushed, loyalty to the group and to Sparta is all that matters. Yet these bonds are forged in harshness. Older boys are encouraged to bully and test the younger ones, striking them, mocking them, forcing them into contests of endurance. Teachers, too, use the whip freely. Public beatings are common, and not simply for failure. Sometimes boys are flogged simply to test how long they can endure without crying out. The most famous of these trials takes place at the altar of Artemis Orthia, where boys are whipped before the goddess until they collapse, sometimes even dying from the ordeal. To survive without flinching is considered the highest honor. Why such relentless cruelty? To the Spartans, it was not cruelty at all but necessity. Sparta was a military state surrounded by potential enemies. The fertile land of Laconia and Messenia was worked not by Spartans themselves, but by the Helots, a population of serfs bound to the land. These Helots far outnumbered the Spartans, and constant fear of rebellion meant the Spartans had to remain perpetually ready for war. The Agoge ensured that every citizen male became not just a soldier, but a soldier hardened against fear, hunger, pain, and hesitation. Sparta's survival depended on turning children into warriors long before they ever held a real spear. Still, beneath this world of discipline, there were glimpses of humanity. Boys sang songs together, often about past heroes and battles. They shared stories, laughed at each other's jokes, and dreamed of future glory. In stolen moments, they might imagine what it would be like to live freely, like the Athenians, or to enjoy the comforts of family life. But such thoughts were fleeting. The system crushed softness wherever it appeared. Fathers rarely raised their sons, and mothers, though distant in daily life, played their own role in shaping this culture of endurance. A Spartan mother was said to hand her son his shield with the words, "With it, or on it. Return victorious, or return dead, never return in shame." By the time you reach the age of 12 or 14, the transformation is already well underway. You are lean, scarred, disciplined, and silent. Hunger is no longer a hardship, but a condition of life. Pain no longer surprises you. Obedience is second nature. You are no longer a boy, but not yet a man, you are something in between, shaped by the Agoge into the beginnings of a Spartan soldier. At 20, you will enter the full ranks of the Spartan military, where your life will continue under the same strict discipline. But already, even as a child, your life has been consumed by training for war. And so, as you drift into thought, you might ask yourself, could any child truly survive such a system without losing part of what it means to be human, or was that precisely the point, to strip away individuality until only the soldier remained? The years of childhood training are over. You are no longer the hungry boy shivering beneath a thin cloak in the Agoge. Now, at the age of 20, you have been admitted into the ranks of the Spartan army. Yet in many ways, your life has not changed at all. The hardships of childhood were not an end but merely a preparation. What lies ahead is not freedom, not comfort, but a lifetime of service to the state. At 20, you are considered an adult in Sparta, but adulthood here does not mean independence. You are not free to choose your occupation or pursue your own path. You do not set up a household of your own or spend your days working in a trade. Instead, you enter the syssitia, the communal mess where soldiers live and eat together. The syssitia is the heart of adult Spartan life. Groups of about 15 men form a brotherhood, eating every meal together, sleeping in barracks, training and fighting as one. Attendance is mandatory. To miss a meal without a valid reason is a serious offense. Food is simple and meager, much like in childhood. The most infamous dish is the black broth, made of pork boiled in blood and vinegar. Foreign visitors recoiled at its taste, but Spartans prided themselves on it. To endure such fare without complaint was a mark of toughness, a rejection of luxury. You might imagine that, after such an upbringing, Spartan men would finally be allowed to live with their families. But no, even marriage does not free you from the barracks. If you take a wife, you are still required to eat and sleep with your syssitia. Husbands often visit their wives in secret, slipping away briefly in the night, only to return to the barracks by dawn. Family life in Sparta is secondary. The soldier's duty to the state always comes first. A typical day begins early. You rise with your comrades, often to the call of the trumpet. Physical training continues, for even in adulthood, the body must remain hardened. Running, wrestling, mock battles, and exercises with weapons fill the morning hours. You practice with the doru, the long spear, learning to thrust in unison with your shield wall. You drill with the hoplon, the heavy round shield that defines the Spartan phalanx. Hours are spent marching in formation, learning to pivot, advance, and retreat as one body, not as individuals. Afternoons may be devoted to hunting or athletic contests, both considered part of military preparation. Even leisure takes the form of training. Songs and dances celebrate war, courage, and obedience, reinforcing the values drilled into you since childhood. Conversations, too, are laconic, short, sharp, witty remarks valued more than long speeches. Meals in the Sisisha reinforce unity. Each man contributes food from his allotment of land, worked by Helot laborers, to sustain the mess. Eating together ensures equality among soldiers. No one is permitted to display greater wealth or indulge in private luxuries. The food is plain, the portions small, and the atmosphere one of brotherhood forged by shared austerity. As you live this life, you are never far from the shadow of Sparta's greatest insecurity, the Helots. These enslaved people work the fields and sustain the Spartan economy, providing the grain, oil, and wine that the soldiers themselves consume. But they outnumber the Spartans many times over. To keep them subdued, Sparta relies on intimidation and terror. Each year, the Krypteia is declared, a secret police force made up of young Spartan men. Members of the Krypteia are sent into the countryside with daggers and simple rations, tasked with killing any helots deemed rebellious or simply too strong and threatening. The purpose is clear: to instill constant fear among the helot population and to give young Spartans their first taste of real violence. Participation in the Krypteia is considered an honor, yet it also reveals the brutal foundations of Spartan society. The state is built on the labor of others, maintained not by freedom but by force. Even in times of peace, the life of the Spartan soldier revolves around the possibility of violence, not just against foreign enemies, but against the very people who sustain their livelihood. Much of daily training revolves around the phalanx, the tightly packed formation that defines Spartan warfare. Each man carries the hoplon shield, heavy and round, made of wood and bronze. Its weight is considerable, but its importance is greater still. A Spartan's shield does not only protect himself, it protects the man to his left. In battle, each hoplite relies on the overlapping shields of his comrades. To drop one's shield is not merely cowardice, it endangers the entire formation. This is why Spartan mothers were said to tell their sons to return with it, or on it. A warrior who lost his shield had lost his honor. Discipline in the phalanx is absolute. Every movement must be precise. Advance too quickly and you leave your comrades behind. Lag too far and you weaken the line. Training is endless, for in the chaos of battle, only relentless drilling ensures cohesion. Though harsh, the communal life of the Sisisha builds bonds deeper than friendship. Comrades become closer than family, bound not just by duty but by years of shared hardship. Loyalty to one's mess group is paramount. To be expelled from the Sisisha is one of the greatest disgraces a Spartan man can suffer. Such a man becomes an outcast, unable to participate fully in society, shunned by peers, condemned to shame. Women, though absent from the barracks, hold a unique role in Spartan society. Unlike elsewhere in Greece, Spartan women are expected to be physically fit, trained in running and wrestling, so that they might bear strong children. They manage households in their husband's absence and wield surprising influence for their time. Their sharp tongues and proud demands reinforce the soldier's duty. A Spartan woman's reputation for sternness was as legendary as her husband's discipline. Unlike other Greek city-states, Sparta does not send its soldiers abroad to expand an empire. Instead, its entire system is designed for defense, for maintaining dominance over the Helots, and for meeting enemies head-on when they come. Life is a state of perpetual readiness even in times of peace. The army drills, marches, and trains as though war might break out tomorrow. For the Spartan, war is not an interruption of life, it is the fulfillment of it. Every day of training, every meager meal, every cold night in the barracks is simply preparation for the moment when the phalanx locks shields and the enemy charges. As you picture yourself sitting in the syssitia, chewing on coarse bread dipped in the black broth, surrounded by comrades you have lived with for years, you realize that this is not simply an army, it is an entire way of life. Sparta has taken you from childhood, molded you through discipline, and bound you into a collective that values the state above all else. But a question remains: does this relentless system of discipline and unity create the most perfect soldiers, or does it strip away too much of the individual, leaving behind only tools of war? All the years of training, the hunger, the whippings, the drills, the endless hours in the phalanx, all of it was preparation for this. At last, the Spartan soldier stands not in the barracks, not in the agoge, but on the battlefield. And here is the paradox: for Spartans, war was not an interruption of life but its culmination. To live was to train, and to train was to prepare for the day when the enemy came charging. Everything else was simply rehearsal. When Sparta went to war, it did so with deliberation. Unlike other Greek states, the Spartans rarely rushed into campaigns. They moved only when necessary, when allies called for aid, or when they believed their dominance was threatened. But when the army did march, it was a sight of order and fearsome presence. Spartan soldiers advanced in silence, not with wild cries. Music guided their steps, the steady sound of flutes keeping rhythm, ensuring that the phalanx moved as one body. To outsiders, this calm approach was unnerving. Where others shouted to summon courage, the Spartans' silence declared their discipline. Each man took his place, shield to shield, spear in hand. Armor gleamed in the sun, red cloaks flowing behind them, a symbol of unity and blood. Before the clash, sacrifices were made to the gods, prayers offered to Ares or Apollo. Then came the waiting, the long tense moment before shield walls collided. When battle began, it was not a series of duels or heroic charges, but a grinding collision of flesh, wood, and bronze. Imagine standing shoulder to shoulder, your hoplon pressed tight against the man beside you. The wall of shields pushes forward, spears thrusting outward in a deadly hedge. The sound is overwhelming, the snap of wood, the clang of bronze, the cries of men as spears pierce flesh. The phalanx is not graceful. It is brutal, exhausting, suffocating. You feel the weight of your comrades behind you, pressing you forward, while the enemy presses back with equal force. The ground becomes slick with blood and mud, feet slipping as you strain to hold formation. And here lies the key: Spartans do not fight as individuals. You are not permitted to break ranks to chase glory. Your life is bound to the man on your left and the man on your right. To falter is to endanger them all. The strength of the phalanx lies not in one warrior's courage, but in the collective endurance of many. This is why Spartans train from childhood to suppress individuality. In battle, there is no room for hesitation, no space for selfishness. The formation must hold, no matter the terror or the pain. The most legendary moment in Spartan history illustrates this truth: the Battle of Thermopylae in 480 BCE. Here, King Leonidas and a small band of Spartans, joined by allies, stood against the vast army of Persia under Xerxes. The numbers were hopelessly uneven. Yet for days, the Spartans held the narrow pass, their phalanx unbroken, their discipline unshaken. Even as waves of Persian soldiers pressed forward, even as arrows darkened the sky, the Spartans endured. They knew they would not survive. But survival was never the measure of success in Sparta, endurance was. To hold the line, to obey the law, to fight until death, this was the highest achievement of the Spartan ideal. When Leonidas fell, his men fought over his body, refusing to abandon their king. When they were finally overwhelmed, they left behind not defeat, but legend. For the survivors of other battles, returning home was not a release from discipline. Even in peacetime, a Spartan's life remained one of training and vigilance. There were no long retirements into comfort, no rich estates filled with luxury. Life continued in the barracks until the age of 30, and even after that, the duties of the citizen soldier remained. War did not bring glory in the way poets described it. It brought exhaustion, wounds, and grief. Spartan men returned to their mess groups, ate the same black broth, trained again for the next call to arms. The cycle never ended. Looking back, it is easy to romanticize the Spartan as the perfect warrior, fearless, disciplined, unbreakable. And in many ways, the system did produce remarkable soldiers. Few could match the cohesion of the Spartan phalanx, the iron discipline of men trained from childhood to suppress fear. But there was a cost. To achieve this, Sparta sacrificed individuality, creativity, and much of the softness of life. Spartan society produced warriors, but little else. While Athens gave the world philosophy, drama, and democracy, Sparta left behind only the memory of its discipline and the legend of its sacrifice. As you stand at the edge of the battlefield, shield dented, spear broken, cloak stained with dust and blood, you realize that the Spartan life was never meant to be easy, or even human in the way we understand it. It was meant to be enduring. It was meant to mold the body and spirit into something greater than the individual, a tool of the state, a piece of the phalanx, a soldier until death. And so, the question lingers: was the Spartan soldier the pinnacle of human discipline, or a warning of what is lost when a society demands absolute sacrifice from its people? If you were a Roman soldier, a legionary, your life was not defined only by battles, but by walking. Endlessly walking. For Rome was an empire stitched together by roads, and its legions were the threads that bound provinces into control. The march was not merely a way to travel, it was a way of life. A Roman legionary carried his world on his back. The soldiers were nicknamed Muli Mariani, Marius mules, after the general Gaius Marius reformed the army in the late 2nd century BCE. He insisted that soldiers carry their own gear, instead of relying on slaves or camp followers. The pack was immense. A heavy wooden frame carried rations for 2 weeks, grain, dried meat, and vinegar to mix with water. A cooking pot and pan dangled from it, along with a water skin. Wooden stakes for building fortifications were lashed to the bundle. Tools like shovels and picks were strapped on. Personal items, a spare tunic, cloak, sandals, and perhaps a small keepsake from home, squeezed into the load. Altogether, the weight could reach 30 to 40 kilograms. Imagine not only walking with this load, but marching 15 to 20 miles a day, across hills, rivers, mud, and scorching plains. And not once, but day after day, year after year, the Roman Empire built over 250,000 miles of roads, and the legions used them constantly. Straight, durable, paved with stone, these roads carried armies from Britannia to Syria, from the Danube frontier to the deserts of Africa. You might think marching on a road was easy, but in worn sandals, calici, with hobnailed soles, each step was punishing. Blisters, calluses, and cracked feet were as much a part of a soldier's life as the sword and shield. And when the roads ended, the legions still marched, across forests, mountains, and marshes. Sometimes, soldiers were ordered to dig their own road as they went, cutting through wilderness and laying the foundation of Rome's expansion. What seemed like endless busywork was, in truth, one of the empire's greatest strengths. The legions were not only fighters, but engineers, road builders, and laborers. A typical day on the march began before sunrise. Trumpets sounded in camp, waking men from their hard sleep. Cloaks were folded, packs strapped on, tents dismantled. There was no time for idleness. Within an hour, the column was formed. Legionaries marched in tight order, not as a disorganized mob. Officers paced along the sides, ensuring the men kept formation. Centurions barked commands, their vine staffs ready to strike those who lagged. Silence was expected, the discipline of the march was as crucial as that of battle. At midday, a halt was called. Packs were dropped, bread was chewed, water mixed with vinegar was drunk to prevent illness. Then the march resumed, until the evening brought the day's greatest test, building camp. Every single night, wherever the legion stopped, a fortified camp was built. Ditches were dug, earth piled into ramparts, wooden palisades raised, tents set in perfect rows. Even after 20 miles of marching with heavy loads, every soldier was expected to work. This was not wasted effort. A Roman camp was a fortress, a place of safety against sudden attack. It also imposed order, each tent had its assigned space, each street its purpose, each officer his quarters. In the morning, everything was dismantled, and the march began again. The army was like a moving city, rebuilt each night, destroyed each dawn. To live as a Roman soldier was to live in this cycle of exhaustion and order. The boredom of the march was as much an enemy as the physical burden. Days blurred together, the crunch of sandals, the weight of the pack, the sight of the same faces. The rhythm of footsteps became the rhythm of life. Some soldiers found ways to cope. They sang marching chants in low voices, or swapped stories at rest stops. Others carved marks into their gear, counting the days until their service ended. Yet service could last for decades. 4. Decades. For many, the march would only end in death. In a foreign land far from home, the battles may be remembered in books, but the marches filled a soldier's years. Victories were few and fleeting. What endured was the endless walking, the sore feet, the constant burden of tools and weapons, the discipline of routine. Rome's power did not rest solely on swords, but on the endurance of its soldiers, men willing to carry the empire on their shoulders, one weary step at a time. So when you imagine a Roman soldier, do not picture only the clash of shields or the cry of battle. Picture instead the endless road stretching before him, the weight of the pack digging into his shoulders, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring the same march again. And ask yourself, was it the battles that built Rome, or the silent endurance of men who walked, and never stopped? If the Roman soldier's life on the march was defined by carrying heavy burdens, it was also defined by the constant struggle to eat, drink, and endure under harsh conditions. Battle was rare. Hunger, thirst, and exhaustion were constant companions. The primary food of a Roman soldier was not meat or vegetables, but grain. Each legionary was issued a daily ration of wheat, usually about 1.5 pounds per day. It might sound plentiful, but the burden was on the soldier to grind it himself, mix it with water, and bake it into bread or porridge. Portable hand mills were part of the baggage. Soldiers took turns grinding grain, an exhausting task after a day's march. The resulting flour was mixed with water into a dough and cooked on hot stones or in simple pans carried on the march. The result was often hard, coarse bread, filling, but far from delicious. Sometimes soldiers made a gruel called pulse, a thick porridge that could be flavored with whatever scraps they found, herbs, onions, or a dash of garum, the fermented fish sauce beloved by Romans. Yet more often, meals were bland, repetitive, and lacking. And lacking in nutrition, meat was a luxury, not a daily reality. Fresh meat came from livestock driven along with the army, slaughtered when necessary. Salted pork or dried bacon sometimes supplemented the rations, though spoilage was always a concern. Vegetables, cheese, and fruit were occasional additions, usually sourced from local farms, sometimes purchased, more often taken without payment. Soldiers became foragers, gathering wild plants or trapping small animals. A lucky unit might come across olive groves, vineyards, or orchards, but these moments were rare and unpredictable. The Roman diet on the march was designed for survival, not comfort. It filled the stomach, but it wore down the body over years of repetition. Malnutrition, scurvy, and digestive problems were not uncommon. The most characteristic drink of the Roman soldier was not wine, but pasca, a sour mixture of vinegar and water. It might sound unpleasant, but it had two crucial advantages: it killed harmful bacteria in unsafe water, and it masked the taste of stagnant or muddy supplies. Soldiers carried leather water skins, refilled whenever possible. Rivers, wells, and streams were essential stops. On dry marches, thirst could become unbearable. Some accounts describe soldiers collapsing from dehydration when forced to cross deserts or dry plains without supply. In extreme cases, men drank from puddles, or cut open animals to drink their fluids. The memory of thirst haunted soldiers more than the clash of swords. A missed water source could cost more lives than an enemy ambush. Meals were not leisurely affairs. Breakfast might be nothing more than a hunk of bread chewed during a short halt. Midday stops were brief, often under the sun with no shade. Evening meals were more substantial, after camp was built. Cooking fires flickered across the camp, filling the air with smoke and the mingled smell of porridge, meat, and sweat. Soldiers crouched over bowls, joking, complaining, or eating in silence. A mess group of 8 men shared supplies, working together to cook, clean, and prepare. The bonds formed in these small groups, called contubernia, were the backbone of the legion's cohesion. Campaigns in hostile lands often meant supply shortages. Armies were expected to live off the land, which could mean requisitioning food from local populations. Sometimes it was peaceful trade, more often it was plunder. For the civilians, the sight of a marching legion meant not only soldiers passing by, but barns emptied, fields stripped, and animals driven away. When supplies ran short, the soldiers suffered most. Reduced rations meant gnawing hunger. Some turned to desperate measures, boiling leather straps, eating roots, or consuming anything vaguely edible. Disease followed hunger, spreading in the cramped tents and among weakened bodies. The empire's strength depended on its ability to feed its armies. More than once, campaigns failed not because of enemy strength, but because soldiers starved before reaching battle. Imagine yourself after a day of marching, sun beating down, throat dry, legs aching. You reach camp, only to find your ration is smaller than expected. The bread is hard, the vinegar sour. Your stomach growls through the night, sleep disturbed by discomfort. And yet, tomorrow you must rise before dawn and march again. The monotony of food and the fear of scarcity were silent enemies. They did not inspire glorious songs or tales, but they shaped the daily existence of thousands. Rome's armies did not conquer through force alone, they survived because men endured hunger, thirst, and exhaustion without breaking. To study the life of a Roman legionary is to see history through endurance rather than triumph. These men fought not only external enemies, but their own bodies, feet blistered, stomachs empty, throats dry. Each day was a battle for survival against the elements, and against the limits of human strength. So when you think of Rome's, imagine not only the gleaming armor and ordered ranks. Picture the soldier chewing coarse bread in the dust, gulping sour vinegar water, wondering whether tomorrow will bring a meal, or only more hunger. And ask yourself, was Rome's empire built on strategy and steel, or on the soldier's ability to endure the simplest struggles of food and thirst? After days of marching, endless labor, and meals of hard bread, a soldier's routine was occasionally shattered by what everyone both dreaded and expected: battle. Yet, even here, reality was far from the grand visions carved into triumphal arches. For the common legionary, combat was terrifying, exhausting, and often deadly. And if he survived, the struggle did not end when the fighting stopped. The night before combat was filled with tension. The camp was quieter than usual, fires burning low, men murmuring prayers or sharpening weapons. Orders were read aloud, formations discussed, and equipment checked carefully. Helmets were polished, shields inspected for cracks, swords and spears examined. But no amount of preparation could ease the weight of fear. Every man knew that tomorrow could bring death, mutilation, or survival at a cost he might carry forever. Battle began with noise, trumpets, shouts, the thunder of feet. Legionaries advanced in tight formation, shields locked, spears or pila ready. The discipline drilled into them on countless marches now determined life or death. The first clash was chaos. Dust rose, screams filled the air, and the orderly line soon devolved into brutal, close fighting. Soldiers pushed with their shields, stabbed with short swords, and tried to stay alive in the press of bodies. The weight of armor grew unbearable as sweat soaked through tunics. There was little time to think. Instinct and training took over. A soldier stabbed at the gaps in his enemy's defenses, then braced himself for the next push. Around him, comrades fell, sometimes silently, sometimes with agonizing cries. Wounds were inevitable. A slash from a sword, a spear thrust, or even the crushing weight of a fallen comrade could end the soldier's service in an instant. Some injuries were survivable, many were not. Roman medicine was crude by modern standards. Surgeons traveled with the legions, armed with scalpels, saws, and clamps. They could remove arrows, set broken bones, and stitch wounds. But infection was always the great enemy. Without antibiotics, even a small cut could become fatal in days. Cauterization with hot irons was common, painful beyond belief but sometimes effective. Amputation was a last resort, leaving men crippled for life. Those who survived were often scarred, limping reminders of Rome's conquests. Victory did not mean rest. After combat, soldiers scoured the field, finishing off wounded enemies, looting valuables, and clearing bodies. The stench of blood and death lingered for days. Burial details dug mass graves, while comrades mourned those who would never march again. Prisoners, if taken, were herded together, some destined for slavery, others executed. Supplies were gathered, camp rebuilt, and orders given to move on. The army could not remain still for long. Even in triumph, the grind of labor continued for a legionary. War was not a single battle but years of service. A typical term lasted 20 years, sometimes longer. Few returned home unscathed. Some never returned at all, buried in foreign soil far from family. Those who did survive might be rewarded with land, money, or citizenship, promises that lured many into service in the first place. Yet the rewards rarely matched the cost. A worn-out veteran might limp back to his village, body broken, haunted by memories of hunger, marches, and comrades lost. Some chose to settle in colonies along the empire's borders, granted small farms as payment. These communities spread Roman culture, language, and law into distant lands. But they were built on the backs of men who had given their youth to endless campaigns. Imagine an old soldier, sitting by a small fire in retirement. His body aches with every movement. Scars cross his arms and legs. He remembers the heat of deserts, the cold of mountain passes, the sour taste of vinegar water, the endless grind of the march. He recalls the sound of swords clashing, the cries of dying men, and the faces of comrades buried far from home. And yet, he also remembers laughter shared in the tent, the relief of a well-dug ditch, the taste of fresh bread after weeks of hunger. The empire celebrated its victories with parades and monuments, but the real history lived in the weary memories of men like him, anonymous, ordinary, forgotten by name, yet essential to Rome's survival. Rome's legions conquered much of the known world, but their empire was not built solely on strategy or commanders. It was built on the endurance of thousands of common soldiers who bore the weight of armor, hunger, wounds, and time itself. The glory of Rome rested on their suffering. Their lives were brutal, their hardships immense, yet through their endurance, an empire rose and endured for centuries. So, when you think of the Roman legions, remember the soldier not as a statue of marble or a figure in triumph, but as a weary man on the march, his stomach empty, his feet blistered, his shield heavy. His story is the true foundation of Rome's power. And perhaps ask yourself, was history shaped more by the great leaders whose names we remember, or by the countless, forgotten soldiers who carried the empire on their backs?